Bill Clinton was one of the most right-wing presidents in modern times. He, not the so-called welfare, so-called reform, from the time of FDR, from the 30s until I think it was 95 that they passed this so-called reform, you had a right, a legal right to seek public assistance. And this reform program threw millions of people into deep poverty. And that was with the Democratic president. And they get away with these things with Democrats. That's why they occasionally want a Democrat in office. But before the Telecommunications Act, you could not, for example, own a television station and newspaper in the same city. So Rupert Murdoch could not buy the New York Post and also have a TV station until Bill Clinton came along. So there is a lot to unpack. It was, looking back, I was not, frankly, as smart as I am now, not as aware as I am now, to see the great damage that was done to the country under this man. And this belief that the lesser evilism, and the late Glenn Ford always said the Democrats aren't the lesser evil, they're just the more effective evil. And they get a lot of dirt done when a Democrat is in office. So this the media consolidation, there used to be hundreds, there used to be thousands more radio stations, TV stations. Now there's 6 corporations that control what you see and hear. And this is very dangerous. And you're right. It means that you don't see the lies. It means that the window is smaller and smaller and narrower. So there used to be, even in corporate media, I'm older than both of you, so I can remember when there might be pushback from a TV network, pushback in the New York Times against a state narrative, and now they're just spokespeople for the state.
Yeah, and I also want to just add that I was a kid in the late 90s, and so I didn't really understand necessarily the political climate, but it wasn't good. I mean, it was not good, and I think there was a lot of glossing over. It felt, personally growing up and then knowing what I know now, it had this feeling of just this like glossing over of US criminality. Like the United States at this time, Bill Clinton really helped to push forward what I think Obama put to the extreme. This, like, the Democratic Party was this party of like progress, despite this general trend of to just like the apocalypse for so many people. But there are people, I remember even growing older as I started to figure these things out. I had people growing up in my community saying like, oh yeah, Bill Clinton, he was mostly good, and he was mostly for peace. Like, we didn't have any wars at that time. And it's like, Bill Clinton was bombing Somalia, bombing Yugoslavia. It's just an absolute lie. There was plenty of wars. The military budget increased just like it did any other time. And there also was that sinister Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC, which was the kind of like the body that consolidated the sort of quote unquote conservative Democratic Party apparatus, the Wall Street establishment that now dominates. And so the 90s were a very challenging time. Yeah, and people, NATO, and you had
terrible.
All of it. You had the crime. Now people will say, okay, the crime bill, right? Because there was more enthusiasm during the Hillary Clinton campaign, so pointing out, oh look, as what Margaret said, welfare being destroyed, and and then you also had the crime bill and all of that, and then the 96 anti-immigrant legislation, all of that now people can talk about, but rarely do you have it come together as sort of a consensus on that period. And I think part of that to me is when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the US really went in, and part of it was the consolidation of the media, the narrative of this is all that there is no alternative. So even if things are getting bad, it's progress if you have, I don't know, quote unquote, you don't have as big of a deficit, or these little things, taxes are a little bit, they're not as bad for middle income people. It's some, there's all these little things, but the general trend was, yeah, there is no alternative. So, so you get what you get, and this is all that there is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do feel like the Soviet Union fell, and then like this nation got like more right wing, like it just like doubled down on it. And I think a lot of that, like when I look back at the Phil Donahue or the Sally Jesse Raphaels, like when I'm watching those clips, and you're seeing that the doubling down on, and it's basically a fight for the soul of America, or things like that, like the future of America. So like when I hear like "Make America Great Again" or "Build Back Better," and this language, because I think Biden even said recently he just wants to save the soul of America, and all of this is like right wing language that was coming out of that era of the early '90s, and I think that by not engaging the '90s at all, we're missing the ways that all of it is seemingly being repeated. I mean, where we're at right now with Roe versus Wade, where we're at with these issues that are being called culture war issues, so that they don't have to address people-centered human rights at all. Like a lot of that was then. So and even to the point of censorship, because the Telecommunications Act, I think, allowed for so much of what we're seeing now. In addition to Russiagate.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. And in '91, when we were told, even people on the left weren't astute enough to see the dangers of a Soviet Union disappearing in a unipolar world. People said, we'll get a peace dividend. That's what we were told. If there's no Soviet Union, then we don't need all this defense spending, and this can be used for the people. Of course, the exact opposite happened. It was an opportunity for the U.S. to increase its hegemony around the world. And you mentioned Yugoslavia. As now in Ukraine, we keep being told that this is the biggest war in Europe since 1945. Well, that's just not true. Under Bill Clinton's leadership, NATO destroyed Yugoslavia and broke it up because it was an independent socialist country. So this is, and unless you remember, it's very frightening to me, unless you personally remember these things, you can just be fooled. Or people who don't think about it think, oh, that's true, no wars in Europe since 1945, when that's simply a lie. There was a war. The U.S. did bomb Yugoslavia, did break it up into smaller nations, and it was a U.S. NATO effort, and it was actually led by Bill Clinton. So that's what makes our work so important, because otherwise history can just be disappeared by the corporate media. People can read in the newspaper, no wars in Europe since 1945, when that is simply not true. And that, I guess, answers our question of why censorship has become such a priority.